Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So apologies for the probably awkward intro, but this video is going to be basically the more condensed version of a video that is going to be uploaded a little bit later, as I filmed this more or less for a ASMR session. So I'm just going to quickly go through the different drawings that I have in this particular sketch pad, I guess, which is mostly alcohol marker drawings, but I've also done some with like pencil crayons like this one and kind of a little bit of mixed media for some of these, but we are actually going to be focusing on this particular drawing. So you can see on the right hand side I have the digital sketch, which I'm showing you guys here on my iPad, and I also did a very brief kind of like value comp just so I can make sure that I know how I want to do the lighting for this piece. I am going to be doing the line work with these particular markers, which are just art Fineliners from Magicfly, and the kind of like picture that you see right now already has the line work, but I decided to throw in the footage of me doing some of the line work in real time. So in terms of who I'm drawing today, I'm drawing Imbibitor Lunae or Lunae. I'm not too sure how to pronounce his name, but you guys have probably seen him floating around either on Twitter or some other posts, or just because it's been more or less released kind of recently about him being on the next patch for Honkai Star Rail. It's basically the other form for Dan Heng if you are not familiar with Honkai Star Rail. So I really wanted to work with alcohol markers, so I kind of wanted to do a little bit of a piece for me to practice using alcohol markers a little bit more. So I decided that I would just take it easy, sketch it digitally, so I don't have to worry about like excess graphite or any of that. And then I printed out my sketch, then transferred it to the Bristol paper, which I'm using today, and I'm doing that via the light pad, and I'm basically just going over my lines with the Fineliners without doing the sketch and then having to erase it and all that jazz. So I'm just basically drawing directly on the paper. I'm trying my best to keep things really clean and making sure that, you know, I'm kind of switching up different colors so that it fits with the certain part a little bit more closely. So I use like reds and browns for the face and any of the lighter areas or any of the gold parts, and then any of the kind of like teal-ish turquoise color I used a dark blue. For the water I also used the dark blue, or no, I used the light blue for that just in case I didn't really like the harsh line work for it. And then everything else I basically just used a black fine liner, because I think for the most part I kind of want the bolder colors to just make a little bit more sense when I'm actually going to be coloring everything with alcohol markers so that I don't get too lost. So here is the finished line work, which I've shown you guys at the very beginning as well, and we are going to be working with the Ohuhu 320 color marker set. So for me, I actually already picked out a lot of the colors prior, so I'll kind of like show a little picture of that so you know what my desk kind of looks like with all the colors. I've also placed another piece of the Bristol paper underneath this one so that I have one, kind of like a scratch pad if I need it, but two is just to prevent any bleed through. Though this paper is super thick, so I actually had no bleed through for the most part, and this paper is like super smooth, and I always find that it works super well with the markers, so it's kind of like my favorite whenever I have to work with alcohol markers like this. So kind of to start off, earlier on the iPad I did show you guys very briefly the kind of like value study that I did super quickly, just because I wanted to kind of establish how I wanted to do the lighting. And the way how I approached this piece a little bit in the beginning is mostly that I want to make sure that the lotus is kind of more or less illuminating his face from below. So I took kind of like the pastel yellowy color and kind of mapped it out on his face and then the hair alongside with the actual lotus flower, so that I could make sure to keep and preserve these places to be very bright without me having to do like a base tone and then slowly building up every color on top. So I'm kind of going to be kind of switching it up every so often on whether or not I layer with like a super light color and then slowly build up value, or if I go in kind of with my mid-tone, do my shadows, blend that, and then blend the lighter color into my mid-tone so that I don't waste a lot of the ink, which I feel like I tend to do a lot whenever I work with alcohol markers like this. But I feel like it's also because I don't have a lot of experience just like practicing with layering certain colors or giving myself enough time to do like a little bit of swatching to see what kind of colors I really like together. So the thing I like about alcohol markers definitely is I guess like the color payoff. It's very bright and just very punchy colors, or you have very pastel colors. They're just very appealing for me, but also the fact that a lot of the colors are very smooth and you can blend with them. But I do find that regardless of which brand I use, larger areas are just going to be a little bit patchy if you don't do at least like maybe a few layers, especially if the color tends to be maybe on the darker side or like a mid-tone side. It definitely feels a little bit more patchy, but I was able to make the skin look a little bit more flat colored, I guess, by doing at least like 2 to 3 passes of like the base tone that I wanted to use. And then as I'm kind of filling in those little patches, I'm also blending out certain areas so that I can give a little bit of a soft blush or like a little bit of warmth above his nose. So it just kind of works out. But throughout like different sections for the drawing, I definitely have to keep switching up my method just because I haven't, like I mentioned, don't use alcohol markers too often, so I feel like I don't have like a specific method on how I approach either certain layering or blending. So I'm kind of experimenting here and there. So for the hair, I ended up doing kind of like the skin tone bleeding into any hair that's surrounding his face. And then I'm picking a few mid-tones to kind of help bridge in those lighter tones to my very dark black color that I'm going to try to put near the crown of Dan Heng's head. But for me, I feel like some of the layering just felt a little bit unnecessary, even though it feels the most natural and makes the most sense to me. But to not want to waste too much ink, I feel like I should have started with kind of like almost my darkest color first and gradually blended it downwards, and then as we move downwards I would make it lighter as we get closer to the face, because a lot of these lighter tones I'm gonna end up actually covering and then blending and then covering and then blending. So I feel like I lost a lot of the progress or lost a lot of the initial base colors that I had placed, and I don't think it's gonna affect it too much if I went to do it like actually gradually from darkest to lightest, going from the top to the bottom versus a whole layer of a light color, a whole layer of a mid-tone color, and then as we get darker and darker I'm just gonna like omit certain areas so that different values shine through. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm not too sure if that makes sense, but maybe in a different video I can do like a demonstration more in real time and like real time commentary that I can show you guys what I mean. Because like, to be honest, I really do want to get better at using these alcohol markers, just because I do miss doing a lot more traditional work, and I'm feeling a tiny bit burnt out from doing digital. And it might be because I've taken a break from digital for a little bit too long, that whenever I try to reattempt something, it feels a little bit off, and maybe I just need to get back into the groove of things. I think it's also because like the last, I think 3 weeks, things have just been quite off, like in real life stuff, not just like, you know, like drawing or like online stuff. It's more like in my personal life it's been a little bit off kilter for the most part. But whatever. So for this piece, I spent a heck of a lot of time on the hair, and the face wasn't too bad. I kept the shading and the lighting very simple for the most part. I didn't want to go too ham with the rendering for the face, and the lighting probably doesn't really make the most sense. I feel like the cheekbones would have been illuminated a little bit, maybe a little bit under the eyes or like the eyelids would have got hit by the light a little bit more. But sometimes when I want to try different lightings and I want to emphasize certain parts of the face, I tend to over render, which kind of gives the piece a very scary look, just because I feel like when I'm working more of an anime-ish style that seems to be a little bit more simple, if I lean towards like semi-realism or realism on with like shading and rendering, I feel like it's just a little bit too overwhelming, and it becomes a little bit, I feel like maybe just it doesn't fit with how the rest of it looks. So I kind of wanted to avoid doing anything that's too like semi-realistic or realism for the lighting, so I kept it very minimal by doing under the kind of like jawline area, chin, and then the ears a little bit, and then the nose, and then the hair. So I didn't really want it to include the cheekbones or make anything super prominent that way. And then for the hair, I did it section by section, and then I spent the least amount of time and energy more or less on the clothing. And I feel like it might be because of my lack of understanding of how I drew it that I got confused on what was what, and because I was confused on what was what, I didn't make sure that the certain colors were the right things everywhere. So I don't know, a part of me feels like I compensated a lot when I started to shade, like, let's say the white areas of his clothes. I made it too dark because I wanted to add too many colors to make it a little bit more vibrant and prettier, but instead it got very muddy and a lot darker than what I initially wanted. And then everything else is just like either very simple shading or me attempting to do more like fancier shading, which didn't really turn out. Like on the gloves right here, I feel like I could have planned it better so that you can actually see the shape of the knuckles a little bit more prominent and not in a weird like a flat way of how I drew it. So I feel like there's just like a lot of small things I could nitpick, especially because I'm watching the footage kind of like in hindsight, and now that I know what the illustration looks like when it's finished, I have just like too many things to be like, this might be off, this might be off, I wish I did something differently and all that. But last but not least, in terms of the actual coloring portion, I am doing the water. So I feel like if you want to see things all in real time with no cuts, I think it's about 2 hours, which will be the ASMR session. So there's no talking. I also cut out the inking portion, so it'll literally just be the coloring with the Ohuhu markers here. And you can see how long it takes me to blend or for me to think about my decisions in that one. 2 hours wasn't too bad. I feel like I was going to spend a lot longer on this one if I didn't kind of like cut out my plan and idea of what I wanted to do for the clothing, because like I said, I kept it very simple. But for the water, I ended up coloring it in a very weird way. I am gonna kind of pull out another darker, deeper blue that feels almost like a blackish purple color, just because I feel like when I was kind of coloring the blue, I added a mid-tone immediately, and it became very dark and very thick feeling. So as I moved across to the right side, you can see I decided to choose a lot lighter colors, and then I'm not going to be adding a lot of that darker mid-tone blue, because if I added it everywhere, I feel like it just doesn't really read as water, because it just feels a little bit too dark. So I'm trying my best to limit the amount of that mid-tone blue and trying my best to kind of blur it out so that we can kind of fade it into this kind of minty green color that I really enjoy using for either adding a little bit more of that yellowy quality to the liquid in the water, or adding it under, I believe, like in his eyes as well as in his hair. He has like a band of highlights that's this color too. Oh, that's another thing I didn't really talk about because I didn't really keep much of the footage because it went by super quickly for his eyes, is that I made his eyes a lot more of that kind of, I don't know, like more of a just a normal blue rather than like a green blue or a turquoise. I do apologize if this video feels a little bit shorter for this actual amount of coloring that I did for this illustration. Like I mentioned, if you want to see more of the coloring process, you can check out the ASMR video that will come out in a few hours from now. I think because this video comes out at 9 o'clock in the morning, I think I have the ASMR version coming out maybe around 5 o'clock. So there's about like 9 hours in between or so. So yeah, if you're interested in that, I'll make sure to link it down below when it is released, or you can just wait for it for whenever. And hopefully when I make more ASMR sessions like this, I will also record a kind of like condensed version with voiceover for people who do not want to watch a longer formatted video or prefer a person talking about the process rather than reading about the process. I'll definitely try my best to balance it so that we can have a little bit of both for people who might prefer a different format for each of them. But in terms of detailing and stuff, I am going back in with the Magicfly Fineliners and kind of darkening up certain corners or certain areas that I feel like got a little bit lost with the values of the markers that I did place down. So a little bit of the lotus, the kind of certain parts of his face, I'm also using like browns and like dark reds for like the petals, his face, and then some of the, I guess like his fingers and stuff. And then everything else was mostly the kind of the dark blue, and then some areas for his hair I darkened up again and cleaned up a little bit with the black fine liner. So I think that's it for Danheng. It's more or less like a simple piece, but it's like something I just really wanted to draw and kind of play around with in terms of using the alcohol markers. So hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me kind of just briefly color this piece. I still really like it. I feel like it could be fun to do a digital piece and just play around with that sketch. So if you like me to do a digital piece of this one, do let me know. But for the most part, I'm just gonna add Danheng to the rest of this batch of marker drawings. So even though I went through this at the very beginning, I'm just going through it again. So a lot of these are marker drawings with mostly like Ohuhu or Artex alcohol markers. And then the other one, I think it's just Hiro's. This one is our text colored pencils. So yeah, if you have any other mediums you want me to do videos about, do let me know, or you want ASMR sessions, do let me know, and I'll definitely find time to record a few more since the weather has been getting a little bit cooler. I feel like there's a little bit less of that air con or like heating kind of sound coming through. But I think that's where I'm gonna leave you guys today, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!